Hey everybody! I am back for the final installment of The Snow Queen. One of my favorite stories. So, we left off with Gerda riding with the reindeer to Lapland because the little robber girl had told her that that's where she would find the Snow Queen. So, let's continue. This little section is called The Lapp Woman and the Finn Woman. They stopped at a wretched little house. The roof almost touched the ground, and the door was so low that you had to creep in and out. There was no one in the house except an old Lapp woman who was cooking fish over an oil lamp. The reindeer took Gerda's whole history, but first he told his own, for that seemed to him much more important, and Gerda was so cold that she could not speak. "Ah, you poor creature," said the Lapp woman, you have still farther to go. You must go over 100 miles into Finland, for there the Snow Queen lives, and every single night she burns blue flares. I will scribble a few words on a dried codfish, for I have no paper, and you must give it to the Finn woman, for she can give you better advice than I can." So Finn means someone from Finland. And Lapland, I believe, and I will have to look this up, is an area up there way in the north where it's really cold, and that's why this is called a Lapp woman. All right. And when Gerda was warmed up and had had something to eat and drink, the Lapp woman wrote a few lines on a dried cod and told Gerda to take care of it. Then she tied her securely onto the reindeer's back, and away they went again. The whole night was ablaze with the northern lights, and then they came to Finland and knocked at the Finn woman's chimney, for it was so cold that she had no door at all. Inside it was so hot that the Finn woman wore almost nothing. She drew off Gerda's fur gloves and boots and loosened her clothes. Finally she read what was written on the codfish. She read it over 3 times till she knew it by heart, and then she put the fish in her saucepan to cook, for she never wasted anything. Soon the reindeer told his story, and after his little Gerda's, and the Finn woman blinked her eyes but said nothing. "You are very clever, I know," said the reindeer. "Won't you give the little girl a drink so that she may have the strength of 12 men and overpower the Snow Queen?" "The strength of 12 men," said the Finn woman. "That would not help much. It's true that little Kay is with the Snow Queen, and he likes everything there very much and thinks it is the best place in all the world. That is because he has a splinter of glass in his heart and a tiny chip of it in his eye. If these do not come out, he will never be free, and the Snow Queen will keep him in her power." "But you can't give little Gerda something, but can't you give little Gerda something so that she can have power over the Snow Queen?" "I can give her no greater power than she already has. Don't you see how great it is? Don't you see how men and beasts help her when she wanders into the wide world with her bare feet? She is powerful already because she is a dear little innocent child. If she herself cannot conquer the Snow Queen and remove the glass splinters that are in little Kay, we cannot help her. The Snow Queen's garden begins 2 miles from here. You can carry the little girl so far. Put her down by the large bush with red berries that stands in the snow, and then you must come back here as fast as you can." Then the Finn woman lifted Gerda onto the reindeer, and away he sped. "Oh, I have left my gloves and boots behind," cried Gerda. She missed them in the piercing cold, but the reindeer did not dare to stop. On he ran till he came to the bush with red berries. There he sat Gerda down and kissed her, and big tears ran down his cheeks. Then he ran back, leaving the poor girl without shoes or gloves in the middle of the bitter cold of Finland. She went on as fast as she could. A regiment of gigantic snowflakes came against her, but they melted even before they touched her, and she continued with fresh courage. The Snow Queen's palace. And now we must see what Kay was doing. He was not thinking of Gerda, and never dreamed that she was standing right outside the Snow Queen's palace. The walls of the palace were built of driven snow, and the doors and windows of piercing winds. There were more than 100 halls in it, the largest several miles long, all made of frozen snow. The bright northern lights lit them up, and very large and empty and cold and glittering they were. In the middle of the great hall was a frozen lake, which had cracked in 1,000 pieces. Here the Snow Queen used to sit when she was at home. Little Kay was almost black and blue with cold, but he never felt it, for the Snow Queen had kissed away his feelings, and his heart was a lump of ice. He was sitting in the hall, pulling about some sharp, flat pieces of ice and trying to put them together into a pattern. He thought they were beautiful, but that was because of the splinter of glass in his eye. He was able to fit them into a great many shapes, but he really wanted to make them spell the word love. The Snow Queen had said, "If you can spell out that word, you will be your own master. I shall give you the whole world and a new sled." But Kay could not do it. "Today I must fly to warmer countries," said the Snow Queen. "I must go and stir up my black kettles." That was what she called Mount Etna and Mount Vesuvius. Those are volcanoes. And off she flew, leaving Kay alone in the great hall trying to do his puzzle. He sat so still that you would have thought he was frozen. Then little Gerda stepped into the palace hall. The raging winds quieted down as if they had fallen asleep when she appeared. She caught sight of Kay and ran to put her arms around his neck, crying, "Kay, dear little Kay, I have found you at last." But Kay was quite still and cold. Gerda wept hot tears which fell on his breast and thawed his heart so that the glass splinter was dissolved. He looked at her and burst into tears. He cried so much that the splinter swam out of his eye. And then he recognized her and cried out, "Gerda, dear little Gerda, where have you been so long? And where have I been?" And he looked around him. "How cold it is here! How huge and empty!" He threw his arms around Gerda, and she laughed and wept for joy. It was such a happy time that the pieces of ice even danced around them for joy. When they grew tired, Kay and Gerda lay down, and as they slept, they melted the ice, forming the word that the Snow Queen had said Kay must spell in order to become his own master. Gerda kissed his cheeks, and they grew rosy. She kissed his hands, and they sparkled like hers. She kissed his hands and feet, and he became warm and glowing. The Snow Queen might come home now, but they had his release. The word love stood written in the sparkling ice. They took each other's hands and wandered out of the great palace. They talked about the grandmother and the roses in the window boxes, and wherever they went, the winds calmed down and the sun came out. When they reached the bush with red berries, there stood the reindeer waiting for them. He carried Kay and Gerda first to the Finn woman, who warmed them in her hot room and gave them advice for their journey home. Then they went to the Lapp woman, who gave them new clothes and let them borrow her sleigh until they reached the border of their own country. The reindeer ran alongside the sleigh till they came to the fields fresh with the first spring green. There he said goodbye. When they reached the forest, which was bursting into bud, there came riding out of it a young girl on a splendid horse. What do you think it is? She was wearing a red cap and carrying pistols in her belt. It was the little robber girl, who was tired of staying at home and wanted to go out into the world, and she and Gerda recognized each other at once. You are a fine one, she said to Kay. I wonder if you deserve to run after all over the world. But Gerda patted her cheeks and asked after the prince and the princess. They are traveling about, said the robber girl. And the crow? Asked Gerda. Oh, the crow is dead, answered the robber girl. His tame sweetheart is a widow now and hops about with a bit of black crape on her leg. She makes a great fuss, but it's all nonsense. Now tell me what happened to you and how you found him. And Kay and Gerda told her all. What a story, said the robber girl. She shook hands with them and promised that if she ever passed through their town, she would come and see them again. And then she rode on. Gerda and Kay went home hand in hand. There they found the grandmother and everything just as it had been. But when they went through the doorway, they found they were all grown up. There were the roses in the window boxes. It was summer, warm, glorious summer. The end. What do you think? You ought to read that one yourself sometime. This is an old book. But if you find the original version, yes, it is. Yep, Hans Christian Andersen from the Andrew Lang collection. All right, well, I hope you like that story. It's a pretty famous fairy tale. Hope you liked it. I liked it. I liked it when my mom read it to me when I was 8, a long time ago. All right, guys. Love you lots. See you tomorrow at our Google Meet.